We went live as soon as he started coughing. Okay. Welcome to In the Know with CaT Bobino, and my extra special guest is Dr. Jonathan Lewis from the Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here, Kat. I appreciate it.
Awesome. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Sure. I'm a professor of geoscience at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. As you mentioned, it's this unfortunately named school because it gets people quite confused all the time. But it's in Western Pennsylvania, not too far from Pittsburgh. So I actually live in Pittsburgh. The geoscience department where I teach is an undergraduate only department. So we don't have graduate students around, which is I think is quite nice. Because we can focus on the students that we have to teach in front of us. In many larger departments, the grad students are mixed in with the undergrads, and it's easy for the undergraduates to get kind of lost in the shuffle. So I think our students experience, a nice close-knit community. We hope anyway, it seems like it. We have a lot of students that are from rural Pennsylvania, many first-generation students. And we draw students from all over the state. Actually, we have students from eastern part of the state and the western part and the northern part. So it's really quite nice. It's a small town. It's the hometown. The town is Indiana, and it's the hometown of Jimmy Stewart. And it's a real point of pride. We call the campus IUP for short. And so I think IUP is proud of having Jimmy Stewart as being one of the products of the town. And I teach. I'm a structural geologist. So that means I work on mountain ranges and the active plate boundaries, like where you live in the Bay Area along the San Andreas Fault. So I work on those kinds of projects.
Wow.
I mostly work in, we have a reverb.
Yeah. All right, well, go ahead.
We're good. These days, I mostly do research in Taiwan. So I'm interested in a place where two tectonic plates are interacting. One of the plates has a line of volcanoes on it, and those volcanoes are running into the continental shelf of China, and it's created this very large mountain range at Taiwan. I also just work in Central America, but not quite as much, actually not nearly as much work in Central America. A little bit of work in Japan, and historically I've worked in where you are in the California in the Central Valley, and eastward into the Sierras and into the on the other side over to around Bishop and the Walker Lane area. It's a very active part of the world, and that's Carter, right?
Yeah, he's decided to be trying to talk now, of course, because he's just been sitting there. But now he likes his.
It's because we're talking about mountain building and earthquakes. That would get anybody's attention. So I'm with you, Carter, on that. So basically, I work on what are active tectonic problems, things where the things are happening today mostly. And so because of that, I teach in that realm. So I mostly teach plate tectonics and structural geology. But I did a bit of time as an environmental professional. So before I did my PhD, I worked as an environmental geologist. And so I also teach classes in the context of environmental geology at IUP. And I'm involved with, our students are all required to do research. So that means that we keep our students quite busy, hopefully in ways that are happy and engaging. And so I've been fortunate, I've been really, really lucky to be able to take students with me to do fieldwork in Taiwan and to go to meetings, sometimes in San Francisco, in Washington. And many of my students have been able to give talks at big meetings, which has really been quite extraordinary. And to see them give a talk at a big meeting is pretty spectacular. So that's really kind of cool. What I do. Mostly what I do.
That's really awesome. That sounds amazing. I mean, as someone born and raised in the Bay Area, I definitely know about tectonic plates and what happens when they rub up against each other or on top of each other. Been a part of that myself. But what I was going to say was, number one, Sharon says hi. She's already sent a message on Facebook. But when it comes to tectonic plates, for us in the Bay Area or California, we know those as earthquakes. But what got you interested in that type of field?
My first year of college was, I wasn't a geoscience or a geology major, and I had a conversation. I scheduled to go meet with a guy who worked at the Forest Service in West Virginia, and just was asking about the future. And it was in the late 70s, and he said that the people right now who are getting jobs are not foresters, they are hydrologists and geologists. And it was kind of a clarifying moment, and I had to go look up and see what hydrologists and geologists do, and I quickly learned that they do interesting things. So I ended up transferring to a different school because my school didn't have a geology program. So once I got into geology, I took a class with a guy who had no hair and a beard. He looked like me, or I looked like him, and he was a structural geologist, and he was working in Taiwan. And I right away knew that that was my future. So it was kind of a very fortunate, clarifying moment. A lot of people don't get that clarification, and they're not sure what they want to do, and I think that's quite challenging because there's a lot of really cool things to do. So I knew I wanted to do structural geology, and so that was the beginning. And then I went straight into graduate school to do a master's degree, and continued in structural geology. And then when I was nearly done with my master's thesis, I moved to Boston to work with the Boston Celtics, so with the basketball team. So I got to work for a pro team for a season, which was really extraordinary, in the front office. It was quite a detour, but it was priceless. And then moved back to Tennessee and started working in the environmental industry, and finished up my master's degree, and did groundwater hydrology, environmental kind of work for quite a few years after
that. Okay. That's really cool. I mean, to do go from hydrology and working with geology to working with the Boston Celtics. That's a major jump. But you never know. Sometimes with our degrees, we're able to transfer to different parts, right?
Yeah, that was nepotism, though. That was unfortunately. I mean, it was wonderful, but there were connections at play that opened that door, and it was a really super cool experience. I wouldn't have changed it, but I felt like a fish out of water, because I was clearly I was a geologist at heart, and I was happy to get back to doing geology after that. So I did a lot of work in the realm of trying to figure out where contaminants were in the subsurface all over the country, from Florida to Texas and up into Virginia. Pretty widespread kind of work. And then I moved to Colorado because I got a hankering to move into the mountains and to be closer to snow and cold weather and skiing and all that kind of stuff. And so I did work in environmental work in the Western states. And then at some point I realized I'd always known I wanted to go into academia if I could. And at some point I had a moment, I realized I needed to go back to school. So I decided to go back to school.
Okay. Uh-oh. Sorry, had to mute my computer. But yes, that's really cool that you were able to do all of this work and then learn from someone who's doing work out of the country. I think a lot of times what people don't realize in the sciences, especially geoscience, is that you can travel with it and go to numerous places to learn and do your research.
Absolutely. It's one of the cool things. In fact, I was still paying attention to geological literature as a kind of a geeky person would. I still got my monthly issues of journal articles. And I read one by a person and the work was in Japan. And actually I read one article, and it made me realize that I needed to go back to school, and I needed to work on a project that was exciting to me, and I needed to work with somebody who I could get along with. So I actually called up the person who was the lead author on that paper, and I ended up going to do my PhD with that person. His name is Tim Byrne, and we had a wonderful, and we continue to work together actually all these years later. So, you know, I thought very specifically I want to do something international, and I want to see the world, and so that was a way to do it. So I ended up spending 4+ months in Japan, doing field work over 2 seasons. And it was quite amazing. It was challenging, incredibly challenging, because I didn't know what I was doing, and I was alone in rural Japan by myself. I like to always joke, I scared a lot of small children in rural Japan because I was this sweaty white guy on the beach I had a large beard, and I was carrying a hammer, and I was completely soaked with sweat. And it was, it was challenging, but it was really fun. And the Japanese people were incredibly kind to me.
That's really cool. So why were you doing the research by yourself? Wasn't this a part of collaboration for the PhD?
Yeah, so that's interesting. It depends really on the size of the project. This was we did get funding from the National Science Foundation. Tim was successful in getting a grant, but a lot of times small projects we don't go over with a large team of people. It's just one individual. So I was there on my own most of the time, and these days maybe that happens less frequently. People are a little bit more conscientious about doing field work alone. Although I was working along coastal regions that were quite accessible. It wasn't like I was on a remote island in somewhere by myself, with that they dropped me off with a float plane or something like that. It was safer in many ways than that kind of work, which was good. But it was hot. It was. I lost a lot of weight every single day in fluids. I mean, it was like 10 pounds I would lose. It was dangerous in that sense. So it was good work, and it was fruitful. The projects came together quite nicely, and so it wasn't until 10 years after I graduated finished that work, I had moved to California, and that I got an opportunity. I got an unsolicited suggestion to apply to go offshore and do some work on offshore Japan to study younger examples of the stuff that I was working on land. And I didn't think I was going to do that. And it turned out I decided to say yes. And it completely changed my path entirely. Much of what I do today would never have come to be because of that decision. So it worked out beautifully.
That's really good, because a lot of times when it comes to science or anything in general, when it comes to the work we do in life, it's one decision, one yes, one part that just kind of deviates us from what we were planning on doing to what we are actually doing. So can you tell me, how did that yes decision deviate you? What was the change in what you were doing?
I had always thought I would continue doing on-land geology, working in plate boundaries, looking at really messy rocks. And I never really thought about doing anything where the only way to get access to them was to drill a hole through them from a ship. And so in deciding to get involved with that project, it was sort of bold, because I was early days. I was an assistant professor, and I thought it might not bear fruit, but maybe it will. And so I ended up doing that work offshore in Japan. We were really trying to drill through, this is sort of in the context of faults. We wanted to drill through the plate boundary fault that is responsible for the really large magnitude 8 and 9 earthquakes that happen pretty frequently in terms of geological timescales in southern Japan. And after doing that, I was on the Chikyu, the Japanese drilling ship, the Chikyu, for Expedition 315. It was a wonderful group of scientists. And afterwards, I decided I wanted to get involved with giving back to that community through service. And one of the things that we do in academia is service. So I decided I would try to be involved with the committee that runs that helps to operate the drilling program for the U.S. It's called the U.S. Science Advisory Committee. So I decided to put my name in the hat, and that I'd served for 3 years on that committee. And it's through that committee at a meeting in Washington that I met Sharon. And Sharon, I first met, so Sharon, hi, I'm John Lewis, I'm Sharon Cooper. And Sharon says, where do you live? And I said, I live in Pittsburgh. And Sharon said, well, I'm about to move to Pittsburgh. And so it turned out that when so Sharon moves to my neighborhood, and we live about 5 blocks away from each other. And that was the beginning of my opportunity to serve in School of Rock. So Jen Collins and Leslie Peart and Sharon were running that program, and they asked me if I wanted to teach on the drilling vessel, on the U.S. drilling vessel, the JR, the Joint East Resolution. And so I was down in Curacao, and we led a field trip around the island of Curacao, and then we sailed to Bermuda. And it was the students that were participating in the School of Rock, and you've done School of Rock, so you know all about it. The students that were participating, they were teachers, and they were profoundly affected by the experience. And that was what got me thinking way back in 2012 that it would be really cool if we could find a way to get undergraduates out to sea. And that's ultimately what Sharon and I were able to put together. And we actually put together the basics. I can show you my screen. Can I share my screen?
Oh yeah, you can share your screen.
This is what the original idea. I don't know if I have my, 1 second. Let's see if I can find this. There it is. So the initial idea, it's not projecting yet, is it? Yeah. This is not exactly what happened, but in 2012, when I was on the vessel with John Snow, who was at the time at the University of Houston, and Leslie Sauter, who is at College of Charleston, we were the teachers, and that was in 2012. And so in 2013, I put this idea down on paper, which is not, it didn't happen like this, but the gears were turning in my head about how do we get students on boats. And so Sharon and I talked about this, and she shared it with people at the folks who were running the U.S. Science Support Program. And people seemed to think it had some potential. And then in 2015, the National Science Foundation launched a solicitation. They put out a call for proposals, and the call for proposals looked like it was written for exactly this kind of thing. And so we wrote a proposal, and there are a lot of moving parts because we're accessing the ships of the academic fleet and putting undergraduate students on them during transits, which you know well because you sailed with us to Alaska with an IUP student, and you went to New Zealand with another IUP student actually. So there's some really interesting connections here, and so the NSF actually supported us for 1 year to sort of let us to see if can we do this? It was like a pilot project, and we actually we were able to have 3 expeditions or 3 transits that first year, and then we got additional funding. So it's been really extraordinary, and the basic model, you know this, but the audience might not know this, is that the U.S. has this academic fleet operated by UNOLS, and they make transits periodically from one port to another. And during that time, as a taxpayer, we're paying to move the vessel, but we're not really making full use of the vessel. So the idea was, let's find a way to get undergraduates with a couple of mentors on the boat during the transit to expose them to professional practice and learn about, what kinds of careers there are in geosciences, in marine technology, and in oceanography and meteorology. And then send the students back home with this kind of crazy new ideas. And we're working on a paper to sort of publish our initial results from 3 years of of experiences where we've taken 120 students on these type of experiences. And so we're working on a manuscript to get those results published. But it seems as if it's a pretty powerful experience for the students. We think in many cases it's kind of like it's a big deal. It sort of changes people's thinking about what's possible for them, and that's really important. So we're excited about it.
Yeah, so there's so much to digest from that, but just to reiterate, School of Rock is a geoscience-based program that actually sends people or students and teachers who teach geoscience all over the globe. And I had an opportunity to go to New Zealand with School of Rock, and that was really my first opportunity to learn more about geoscience and to really learn about volcanoes, which I had no clue about. And because of my journey with School of Rock, I was also able to do STEM Seas, which I'm wearing my shirt from STEM Seas right now. The boat that I went on was the Sekuliak, and it is a research vessel. And I got to sail through the Bering Sea in Alaska, and the students got to learn, it was undergrad students who got to learn all about geoscience, oceanography, biology, things like that. And these programs are available. I know right now the world is kind of closed, but I'm going to definitely share the links of these programs so people can see it, and hopefully in the very near future be able to participate. But I do want to say it's amazing that, again, how small the world is, that you were able to meet Sharon. Sharon moved to Pennsylvania, which is very close to you and in your neighborhood, basically, and together do School of Rock and STEM Seas. Like, that is an amazing opportunity for everyone. And I'm
I think I froze or you froze. Somebody froze.
Oh.
Might have been me. Might have been me.
What was the last thing you heard?
It was an amazing opportunity.
Yeah, well, it was an amazing opportunity, and I'm thankful that I had that chance to go to New Zealand and to sail in Alaska. And what I was asking you was, how do more students find out about this opportunity?
Oh, yeah, good question. So we've in School of Rock, of course, is largely teacher training, and the connections that we have through IODP, which is now the International Ocean Discovery Program, and Sharon is the education outreach point person. She runs the program for IODP for the US. It's called the US Science Support Program. And so from the get-go, when we started to build STEM Seas, we invited a large group of IODP scientists from all over the country to have a kickoff meeting where we kind of put together our operating principles, like what were our priorities. And that IODP community is incredibly enthusiastic. So they immediately set about talking about it in their classrooms and sharing it. So the first year that we ran the program, we had over, now I can't remember the number, over 800 applicants for just a handful of spots. So the word got out quickly. One of the things that STEM Seas is trying to do is we're trying to broaden participation and reach students who don't commonly participate in geoscience things. We're really working hard. One of our primary objectives is to get people on the vessels who would not have such an experience. And so we're trying to reach out to minority serving institutions, HSIs and tribal colleges, HBCUs. One of the things that we actually, Sharon was able to secure some funding for us to do a listening tour and travel to some of the HBCU campuses and try to have conversations and listen into what the needs are, what the interests are, to see whether or not we could do a better job of recruiting students from HBCUs. We've had HBCU students in participate, but we're not getting the application pressure that we had hoped for. And so we're looking for opportunities to get the word out. the funding landed, and then the Corona crisis came. So we have not been able to do that work. And in fact, all of 2020 was no ship operations that we had access to. So we didn't sail any students on STEM seas in 2020. We did pivot very quickly with the help of UNOLS and the ship operators to do some virtual experiences where our students who had already been accepted to the program, but now couldn't travel, got to do some ship to shore connections and meet some scientists. And we think that that was pretty successful, but there's nothing quite like going to sea. You were in the Bering Sea, so you know how it can be difficult, but being in a cohort where everybody's sick together builds a lot of meaningful relationships because it's taxing, it can be challenging. So
yes, and so what I will say is, as someone who's a graduate from the HBCU, I'm always willing to lend a hand to get that information to the school. Number two, you never know who you're going to meet. Sorry, my co-host is sleepy now. We're trying to get you information. But you never know who you're going to meet on some of these programs. So with School of Rock, my roommate her name is Melissa, and she's actually from Australia and works at the Australian Museum. And she says hi, by the way. She's doing cool, amazing things out in Australia. And then Sharon, she commented that we will open up 2021 applications for STEM seas as soon as we have permission to sail students again, waiting on the vaccine rollout, which we all are basically. So hopefully, this summer or fall, these programs will be up and running again.
Yeah, but we hope so for sure. One of the things that we did in 2017. So when did you go to New Zealand? 2018?
18. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so 2017, there was a long transit of the Geordie's resolution. So we were able to get a little bit of additional money from the National Science Foundation to take advantage of the long transit to do a kind of special School of Rock where we partnered a teacher, a K through 12 teacher in a diverse community with a scientist who might not be an IODP scientist, but who might be interested in someday doing some IODP science. And so we created partnerships, and we sailed from Subic Bay, Philippines to Townsville, Australia. It was quite a long transit. And we focused intensely on both the science, the sort of the normal School of Rock stuff. How do we teach about the climate change and tectonic hazards and whatnot using a ship? But also we focused a lot on diversity, and we really focused on JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And from that, Lisa White was able to, we sort of came up with some ideas about a proposal, and that led to a project called A-STEP, which she's running with Sharon. One of the participants on the ship had authored a paper, not yet, she had authored a blog at that point. She authored one of the most cited papers in the context of the homogeneity problem that our field has, and that's Rachel Bernard. Rachel Bernard from Cooper Dock wrote a paper in Nature Geoscience that just shows the lack of diversity in the professorate, basically in the PhD earning people, is incredibly homogeneous. It doesn't look like the country. And I feel a real strong sense that we need problem solvers widely distributed in all of our communities so that people in communities can have the expertise to say, we need to think about solutions that are right for our community, not having outside experts come in with the solutions. So I'm quite keen to continue on this sort of a mission to focus on JEDI issues so that we can really have a more broadly trained geoscience talent sort of in every community in the country if possible.
That's really cool. And I want to remind everyone that this is a live show In the Know with CaT Bobino with Dr. John Lewis. And I can see your comments, which is why I'm reading the ones from the people on Facebook thus far. But I do see people on YouTube. So if you have comments or questions, please make sure you put them in and we will shout them out on the show. And Dr. Lewis will answer them if they are pertaining to what he's talking about. But so Dr. Lewis, that sounds really good with the JEDI program. that's one's new to me, although Dr. White is not new to me. And if you've listened to or watched the podcast before, you've seen Dr. White on there. She is a geologist as well at UC Berkeley. And she actually, what is she, like a micro paleontologist, I think is her actual title, but she does amazing work in the geosciences and in diversity of geosciences. So I'm really happy that she's a part of it. And she and I toured New Zealand after School of Rock. So we stayed for another week or two, I think it was. We stayed a full month in New Zealand and drove around and got to see all the beauty of New Zealand. In fact, I wanted to lose my return ticket and just stay in New Zealand because it was amazing. But it's such a small world. And I'm glad that you guys are working on bringing geology to the masses and bringing opportunities for people to participate in things that they may not have even known about, which again, I didn't until a few years ago. So what do you see, hopefully, when the world opens back up, what do you see the future of geology and the programs you're a part of?
That's a good question. I think there's a lot of opportunities across a lot of different sectors from, there's traditional fossil fuel industry. There's jobs, there historically have been jobs there. When the price of energy goes down, those jobs become more scarce. But there are jobs in that realm. There's also jobs in sort of renewable energy in that realm, and tidal energy and wind and solar. There's a lot of resources that need to go into all of those different so-called green technologies. So I think there's opportunities there. There's also a lot of there are some workforce shortfalls coming in the environmental sector, and that's going to be increasingly large. Coastal communities are going to be facing major challenges as we move forward. A lot of communities of color that are on the front lines of climate change. There are huge opportunities for us to be more well prepared for a future that has, more profound storm surges and more frequent storm surges. New Orleans is below sea level. It seems problematic, just sort of, the very first, the basic idea. So that's a major challenge. The whole Gulf Coast, all of our coastal communities need expertise. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity, not just in the federal, NOAA and NASA and the USDA and the US Geological Survey, but also in the private sector for emergency managers, for brownfield redevelopment, for urban watersheds, which are profoundly challenged in many places, for drinking water, like Flint, Michigan, which was, incredible tragedy. So if we have talent more widely distributed, we can deal with some environmental justice issues that are often come down along racial lines, and partly because of housing practices and very sort of difficult and troubling practices of the past. And the legacy of those practices, I think, is still with us. And so environmental justice is an area where, whether it's air quality, whether it's dealing with soil chemistry, the things that affect lives of communities, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So I'm hoping, people see that hydrology and soil science and drone technology to do surveying of brownfields, the realm of hazards, landslides, subsidence. I mean, there's sort of a lot of opportunities. And of course, to Dr. Lisa White's beloved diatoms, the diatoms are incredibly pervasive in the environment, and they're really good ecological indicators, not only for the history, the deeper time, which she works on, but also for sort of modern environments. So I'm pretty hopeful that there are great opportunities. Well, I think what the geoscience community needs to do is get away from, we've historically been profoundly ableist, like, we climb mountains and we hang from cliffs and we do things. And there's a lot of that doesn't seem appealing to a lot of people. It's appealing to some people, but not everybody. And we need to make it known that there's jobs in all kinds of different avenues, different ways. And so we actually we're working to get a project funded to build a geological summer field camp field class for all the schools in the Pennsylvania state system of higher ed, which is essentially like the CSU system in California. So,
Yeah.
CSU Sacramento and all the CSU campuses. It's akin to that system. And right now we don't have such a field class, and we're trying to build something that would showcase to all the quarters in the state, so the Erie and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, to show people in high schools the relevance of geoscience to their lives. Kind of the thing that you said, that you don't hear about this, you don't know about it. Like when you're in high school, you don't know that there's a career possibility. So we're working on that. That's something that's kind of on the, we hope in the future soon. We'll see.
That sounds amazing. It sounds like there's just going to be hopefully a plethora of job opportunities in the future in the geosciences. So if someone was interested in having a job in the sciences, and hopefully something that's going to be withstanding, geosciences is a way to go. And we have a question on Facebook from Alyssa. She says, so understanding and dealing with increasing occurrences of natural disasters would be another field to expand?
I believe so. I think there's probably a number of different ways to go about that. One might be from a meteorological perspective, to try to understand the cycles involved with the short-term weather phenomenon. Another would be to look at it from an oceanography perspective, because the coupling between the oceans and the atmosphere really is what controls a lot of what we experience in terms of our disasters of that sort. And then there's another angle still, would be to try to understand the past, which is where paleoceanography comes in. And this is where Dr. White has worked on looking at microfossils, and to try to understand what kind of drivers are at play, where are the tipping points in terms of large-scale global geochemical cycles and carbon and other parameters. So I think there's a number of different ways to go about that, even from an emergency manager's perspective. Like the emergency manager community also has a homogeneity problem. They're often serving communities that don't look like the people that are doing the work, and they come from far away to deal in the aftermath of a storm in Galveston or in Houston or New Orleans. So I think it's a great question. I think I would encourage listeners to pay attention to, like every week, Nature magazine is published, and you can get it from the local library, hopefully. And they have news and views in the front, and they often talk about emerging issues. For example, lithium, things that are needed to build batteries. Well, lithium doesn't come out of the ground without a footprint and some ecological impact. So if we move toward more batteries, that's good, but we have to think about it holistically. We tend to think rather myopically. So
right.
I would encourage the listener to, and anybody who wants to follow up with me, you can share my contact information. Not that I know anything, but.
That's good. I think that's an amazing thought process behind it, and making sure that we see what's emerging in the sciences, not just geoscience, but on all the sciences. And I like to always tell the audience that you never know what you can make a career out of. There's so many people who start off on one direction that end up going another, or intertwining two different things like music and science or art and science, and creating a program that way. Because the person I just talked to last week, or no, 2 weeks ago, he was into music before he went into science, and now he teaches kids biochemistry, and sometimes it's with the idea of music behind it. So you never know. Just to be open to the ideas of what's out there and what could be next generation research. So I have another question.
Kat, can I interrupt one? First of all, your talk with Dr. the one about the biochemistry.
I call him Dr. Phil, but it was Dr. Phil.
Yes, yeah. That was fantastic, and it was a great example. It was really cool, the steam and the music and all that angle. But another thing that I wanted to, before we go ahead, to the listener who asked that question, there's a NSF funded project right now called Coastlines and People, COPE, and it's funding projects that are quite holistic, that are involving a variety of different stakeholders, from the fisheries people to the people that do tourism and need beaches for tourism, but also the folks who worry about intertidal wetlands and being ready for storms. So there are communities that are kind of coming together to try to understand these coastal threats and the changes that are coming. So the person who asked the question about where the future lies, you might look at what kinds of projects are being funded and where the interests and where the angles are, because there's a multidisciplinary opportunities there. From the people side to the economic side to the science side. There's a whole spectrum of possibilities. So I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay. Yeah, I mean, please cut me off if you got more information for them, because that's all of this is about, is making sure people know what's going on and can see this. The question was from Tavari. Was for me actually. Will you be participating in School of Rock and do your podcast with the group? I'm very much open to it. I'm always open to meeting new people. So, Sharon and John, if you ever want me to come with you, I'll come with you. But so now that we are talking about that and what we are dealing with in the near future, do you see School of Rock or STEMCs expanding more, maybe doing more trips or encompassing more students?
Well, we would like, I think STEMC is funded right now by the National Science Foundation, and it's relatively not a huge ticket item in many sense. It's really, we cover the expenses of the students getting to the vessel, and then the ship is making its transit anyway. So the operators have been basically making that transit and providing the food, and so that we aren't paying those costs. There aren't costs for the people on the boat, and then we fly them home, and then there's money to help to do the studies, to do the surveys and understand our impact. We would like to think that STEMCs can continue for a little while. We would like to find ways that it could become part of the way of doing business, that the ship operators it continues. Currently, it's funded as a National Science Foundation project. And as I said, we hope to do that. Last year, we were going to do 6 transits. So that's bigger than we had ever done before. Probably there is some sort of realistic limit because of the numbers of ship transits that are available. So I wouldn't be surprised if 6 is pretty close to saturation. I don't know, it could get a little bigger, but in terms of School of Rock, so Sharon is the person in the know for that, because I'm only on the edges of School of Rock. I have been blessed to be able to be part of 4 of them, 3 on the Geordie's resolution, and 1 we ran once version of School of Rock on the campus at IUP. We actually did it right on our campus in Pennsylvania, so that was really cool. I think that the ship itself is slowly getting close to the end of its useful life, and so there's a lot of the National Science Foundation just put out a call for proposals for people that want to build a new ship. So if anybody in the audience is keen to write a proposal and say, yes, I'll build you the next ship, you should talk to your friends about that. But I think that there's a great commitment by the drilling community to continue to do this kind of teaching and getting the word out about the program and about the importance of the science and the implications for the human condition. So I would say the future looks bright for School of Rock, but I'm a half glass, half full kind of guy. But that's fine.
That's cool. So the Geordie's resolution is a very I'm not gonna say scary, but it's a very interesting boat with a humongous drill that they take out into the middle of the Arctic and many other places. and dropped this drill into the ocean floor to take out a core, like a long cylinder core of the earth on the sea floor. And they take it and they really do a lot of research. There's a lot of research done on the water and the core that is taken out of. So I got a chance to just tour the boat, but not actually sail the boat, because we looked at it when it was docked in New Zealand. But it's a fascinating research boat, but I can see why it might be close to retirement. So hopefully anyone interested in that type of research or engineering will be able to develop a new research boat. So that would be cool, something to keep an eye on what they're doing as part of geological science and research. So I didn't know that. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Well, we hope it's not at its end, but it's clearly aging, and I think the community knows that. That's why the call for proposals for people that are interested in building the next vessel are sort of being entertained right now. The call just came out like last week, so this is hot off the press kind of development. So
Okay. Well, since we're ending the show, coming to the end of the show, goodness, sometimes my words get jumbled. Is there anything else that you would like the audience to know about you and or the work that you do?
I'm always interested in synergy. Synergy is kind of my hardwired philosophy. So if anybody has an idea about something that they think, that they're doing or they're aware of, and that they know that we're doing, and they see opportunities to build a connection that makes something stronger by sharing that knowledge, then reach out to me. I think there's a lot of amazing stuff happening on a lot of different fronts. And sometimes what we need to do is simply connect the pieces to come up with something that's more powerful and more impactful. And so I'm worried about the homogeneity of the discipline. And so I'm always looking for ways for us to become, not just to bring more people in from communities of color. So, the BIPOC world is not doing geoscience in the way I think we need to as a nation to be successful, to address problems. But a major problem is that I think our communities have not been keeping people and retaining them. And some of that has to do with some sort of toxicity within our institutions. And we need to do a better job of being more welcoming to communities, so that when people get in, they feel comfortable and they thrive. And we have better problem solving capabilities when we bring ideas from all different corners. And so if anybody out there is interested in that kind of thing, you don't be shy about reaching out. I'm always happy to bounce off ideas and bounce around ideas. Sharon, who lives up the street, back in the pre-COVID days, and hopefully soon, we will regularly go have coffee and sit down and find new ways to take over the fleet of ships or some other thing, and do more with the stuff that's already happening. So reach out to me. I've got a lot of different wacky ideas that I'm happy to share, one-on-one with people. So get in touch.
Well, I will definitely say that I could be one of the first people, because I love synergy. The whole reason for doing this show is to bring people in the world of STEM together and to share this with the next generation, but as well as share it amongst each other. So if there's any synergy that I can help with, I am always willing to be a part of that, especially because of this show. I'm able to meet so many different people in different disciplines. So again, I'm all for it. You can always bounce things off of me. John, I am available. And then Melissa, she said, what? The technology machines was top range. Don't scuttle it. It's an incredible vessel, which Sharon replied. Maybe we can make it to the museum once it's retired, but it still has a few years left. So that's good. They were talking about the ship, which is awesome.
The ship is awesome.
Yeah, it is. It's an incredible machine. But yes, I will say too, to the point of diversity in STEM and being more welcoming. Unfortunately, it's not just geoscience. It's kind of across the board when it comes to science and sometimes even STEM, that there's a toxic level of what we call crabs in the bucket, where people are trying to climb up and they're pulling people down as they climb instead of pulling people up alongside of them. And hopefully, this is something that will begin to change, and people can realize that there's room for a lot of people in very the same or similar disciplines. And we don't have to be crabs in the bucket, but we can always just reach back and bring the next generation up with us. So
I completely agree. It's not a zero-sum game. People tend to get to think it's if I give up something, then if somebody else gets something, then I'm losing something, and it's not that way. There's room for lots of shared vision and collaboration. So so I love the idea of reaching back and grabbing somebody from below and helping pull them along. So yeah.
yes, absolutely. And like I said, Melissa was my roommate, and she's from Australia, and she says Australia is apparently the worst in the world for women in STEM numbers.
Well,
I did not know that. So, but I mean, yeah, I mean, America's not doing much better, I would say. We're not doing that great. But John, how can people get in touch with you? What is the best way for people to find you on social media or to get in touch with you?
so probably email is fine, which is jclewis at iup.edu.
Okay.
The IUP web page, if you just Google IUP and John Lewis, you'll find me. I'm not very good at Twitter, but I have a Twitter handle, which is John Lewis, and then the number 4 Earth. I think that's the one. I think that's me. I'm not good at Facebook. I don't know. My students know just how bad I am with this. So they help me.
It's all good. Well, again, it's JC Lewis at iup.edu. If you would like to get in touch with him, let's create that synergy with people and take science to a whole new level, and incorporate what we know from our own past and history and bring it to the next generation, which I think is awesome. But thank you, John, for joining me today and being a part of In the Know with CaT Bobino.
CaT, it was a pleasure. I really appreciate it. Thanks a million, and we'll see you soon, somewhere in person, I hope.
I hope so. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you again for being a part of In the Know with CaT Bobino. We had an amazing time talking to Dr. Lewis and learning a lot about the geosciences and the programs. Sharon says, thank you, Sharon, and for even introducing me to all of this stuff. So I want to remind you that we will be live next week. And let me see, we are going to be talking with Dr. I'm not going to say her name right, Dr. Heloise. I'm saying it completely wrong, and I know it. But she is going to be talking to us about being an astrophysicist. She is at the University of Auckland, New Zealand. So it's going to be morning her time the next day. But she's going to be joining us at 6 p.m. next Wednesday. So make sure you join us live. You can be on Facebook, live on Twitter, and live on YouTube. We're working this out. Then we're also going to do another show the following day at 11 a.m. Hopefully, students and teachers or anyone can join. But that's what it's going to. That's with Anita Garden, and she is an entrepreneur in technology. She created a program where it is basically a what do you call that? It's uh, one of those guest services, but it's for people in tech. So a lot of times people in tech, they work crazy hours, and tech companies offer all these amazing incentives for them to work these crazy hours, which is we'll do your laundry, we'll give you food, transportation is free, blah, 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 blah. So her company, oh, it's a concierge. That's the word I was looking for. Her company is a concierge service for some of these tech companies. Last time I spoke to her, she had a contract with Microsoft. I'm pretty sure she's probably expanded because that was a few years ago when I spoke to her last. But basically, if you work at some of these tech companies, you will call or use your phone to send a message to her company, and you can have daycare, you can have elder care, you can have someone pick up your dinner, pick up your laundry, do all these concierge services for you so that when you leave work, it's already done. And so we're going to be talking to her on Thursday at 11 a.m. So make sure you join us for In the Know with CaT Bobino, where we are talking to all these amazing people doing amazing things in STEM. So have a good rest of your day.